So, for a lot of persons, accumulating things in life might be hard. Certain things might be a little harder for some of us based on our backgrounds. Because if we do actually check the facts, most of us aren't born in a family where we get to accumulate things from them. Things aren't passed down by generation. Some of us don't even get basic knowledge from our family members because most of them don't know about intelligence and what actual education means to the next generation coming. So this will pass on just the same for persons who are trying to accumulate maybe a new car, maybe a house, or the main thing that we are going to talk about today, and that's land. Because land is something that a lot of persons will like to own and should own, because owning your own property is something that can give you peace of mind, something that can set your next generation to come a better life. So in this video, I'll be explaining to you why it is hard for us, most of us in society, to own a proper piece of land, and why it's easier for most persons who are rich.
September we met, I could tell by your smile.
Welcome back to another video from the channel, Concept of the Mind. And on this channel, I talk about a few things that I think most persons in society will come to appreciate if you want to do good in society, that is. So I speak about concepts that people will like to hear about if they want to have actual life betterment, and I give somewhat business advice just the same. So if you feel like this is something that you would be into, just click the subscribe button and turn on your notification and hit a like and leave a comment in the video. So for most persons, owning a property or owning their own home is something that they feel like they need to do, and I would agree with that because it is something that we should do. Everyone should have a space or somewhere they call home, somewhere that they know that is their piece of plot, or just know that that's theirs. So when we come to see that there is a small percentage of persons who actually own their own property or own their own home, this would rely on people realizing that the prices of land is growing exponentially. If we check back to the date of in the 1990s or the 1980s, in Jamaica that would be something different, because coming from slavery, we wouldn't acquire land so easily, and something that would be problematic for most Jamaicans. But in all truth and honesty, there are a lot of persons in Jamaica who has a lot of land because of family plots and whatsoever. But when we actually check the land structure, most of them are in hilly points of the country, in the countryside of it. So these land will take a lot of working on, they will take a lot of building on, they will take a lot of cleaning up for us. And that's the issue for most persons. People will not want to work on their land per se by themselves to prepare the land for housing or such forth. And when you consider the fact that Jamaica, the two major points in Jamaica are like Kingston and Montego Bay, and sometimes even Spanish Town, Portmore, persons will go to that side for job opportunities and for better life opportunities, thus leaving that. So believe it or not, there's a lot of persons in Jamaica who are homeless. And I'm not talking about persons who are homeless on the streets, even though there are over 2,000 homeless persons on the street in Jamaica. I'm talking about persons who don't actually own a home, persons who don't actually live in a space that they can classify as theirs and their name is on a title or something of the sort. These persons will go along and lease places and rent for most of their life, because when you reach a certain age, you have to leave home and start a life for yourself. But acquiring somewhere for yourself is quite difficult at times, because when you check the land prices in these times, you will see that the prices are much different from in the 80s, where land prices were different. So take for instance Kingston and Montego Bay. A 2-bedroom house will go for like $20 million, believe it or not. And when you check the amount of unregistered land that is in Jamaica, you're working about 40% of unregistered land in Jamaica. And this is land that the government owns for themselves or is just left by persons who died. So when you do the maths and realize that the unregistered land in Jamaica would come up to about $200 billion, and if you check the states, it would be something almost similar. When you do the stats for persons who actually own properties for themselves, in 2004 the stats was like 69% of persons own land and properties for themselves, and now in 2021 it's less than 63.4% of persons who actually own a space for themselves. So in the States and in Jamaica, you have $200 billion in unregistered. But this is something that we don't have to look on as something bad just the same, because higher land prices would mean that inflation is happening, and inflation is something that we can control to somewhat, but it will happen. So higher land prices would mean that if someone invests in a piece of land from like 5 years ago, that would mean that their investment will see a higher percentage at this time. So this is where persons who have a lot of money, who have a lot of value in land, will invest and at the end of the day get a bigger deal on what they have invested. So this is where the rich people come in, and this is where persons will buy land for a lot of money, trust me, and they will take up a lot of land, and it's mostly farmland for most persons, because when you acquire a piece of land that you can do farming on, aside from persons who are doing construction and building hotels and whatsoever, you invest into something that you can use over time and still sell back for more money. So persons will lease the land, and they can also rent out the land or cut it up into smaller pieces and sell it and still make a profit. But aside from the persons who actually get money from selling land after they've bought it for a couple of years ago, what will happen to people who are just acquiring land or want to acquire land? Mainly the people who feel these inflation on land prices, like new farmers and farmers on a whole, are persons who are just buying a piece of land to build a house on or a structure. These persons will feel it the most, because when you check the times, I'm not quite sure what would cause the land prices to increase, but these are the persons who will feel it the most. When you are a new farmer and you have a business module that you want to supply maybe 50,000 pounds of onion per month, and you know you have a piece of land, but that land won't suffice for the operation that you're going in, you will have to acquire another piece of land. So if you are going to lease or rent or even buy, you will feel the burden of paying for that land. So the question begs to ask, why do rich people buy so much land? Because when you check the stats, there are a lot of persons who are the ultra rich and the filthy rich who have a lot of lands. I'm talking about persons like Bill Gates, who has over 500,000 acres of land. So it really begs to ask, why do they buy so much land? And why do they buy so much farmland? So my thought on this is, land is a good holder for value, as I stated before, because if you buy a piece of land like from 5 years ago and now you will have it, you will see that the prices per acre would increase. So this is why most rich person will invest in land. And when you buy farmland in such quantities, silently, you will have control over what will be planted there, and you can also hire persons to farm that land for you. So in the meantime, you are holding the land, persons will farm it for you, or you can lease it. But if you actually have persons farming for you, you will see a bigger increase on whatsoever you are doing, because now you will also be penetrating the farmers market and have shares in that. So another reason why persons who are rich buy so much land is because land is a limited resource. There will be no more of it, and there can be no duplication of it. Land is what is here, and it is what will stay. So that is what we basically get. So it goes to say that persons who has the most of it will have the most power in society. So it's not just necessarily money, because money is something that can vanish away very easily. And if you check hedge funds and how persons store their money, you will realize that they don't actually store physical cash, not in banks or in any offshore accounts. So persons invest in things that cannot be damaged or things that cannot. Now something is being done for farmers when the private sector will invest in farmers and help them to acquire land to do farming, like lease the land for them or something of that. But the persons who are benefiting from these leased lands for farmers isn't necessarily the farmers themselves. These persons who are benefiting from it is only the persons who are rich, because they are the persons who really and truly have the land to spare, to use over the time, as I said before, and it won't really hurt them. So they buy the land, and then the private sector can give farmers land to use, and they pay a small premium, and the persons who do own the land, who are rich and wealthy, will make more profits off the land over the years to come. But another thing where not owning land as a farmer, this can affect them, is that if you now realize in Jamaica or in most countries, there are being a lot of imported produce. So the country might be able to produce it for themselves, but farmers don't have land for themselves and can't afford to pay lease or to rent. Because most of these farmers, if we are being real, they don't have the mindset and the resources to make a budget for like 10 years, and when investing they can see a profit over the 10 years of leasing that land and produce for their own country. So is it really something good for non-farmers to own the land for themselves, then lease it? It is a good business module, but when we do get rich off of it as the richer persons, the poorer class who are actual farmers who go to farm daily and that is their livelihood, they will lose, and the country itself will lose, because we have the land to produce for ourselves, but we cannot produce for ourselves because the farmers don't have the actual resources they would need to produce these crops and to get it done for the country. So I would think that if there were a restructured way for farmers to get access to land, it would actually be better for the country, where we would produce for ourselves, and then inflation will actually go down and we'll have more gross domestic products. So that will also affect the GDP of the country and will give us a fighting chance when it comes down to exportation and limits importation. So if you do agree with what I said in this video, or you have your own points to share, you can just leave it in the comment section down below, or feel free to DM me on Instagram at Concept of the Mind.